The city of Constantinople represents something extraordinary in world history, the creation of a new capital for an empire that was already over 600 years old. But it was more than the new capital for the Roman Empire and the first newly designed Christian city, because it also grew into the greatest European city of the Middle Ages. Now, by the 4th century AD, it was clear that Rome was not conveniently located as an imperial capital. It was too far from the sea, and the sea was the major way that rapid long-range transportation took place. It was too far from the major population and economic centers of the empire, which were generally found in the east, the Asian provinces, and it was too far from the frontiers, so the government in Rome could not respond rapidly to invasions, to threats along the borders. Rome had therefore largely become a symbolic capital rather than a center of government. By the time of Constantine, when he came to power in AD 306, his predecessors had shared power in groups of 4. This is a form of government called the Tetrarchy, which just means rule by 4. And they had divided the empire into spheres of influence, in which they had founded regional capitals closer to the frontiers and population centers to protect and govern the Roman Empire. These 4 regional capitals were at Trier in Germany, Milan in Italy, Thessalonica in Greece, and Nicomedia in Turkey. And when Constantine was looking for a place to refound the capital, he selected a spot already occupied by the small Greek town of Byzantium. Constantinople, the city he founds, provides a bridge between the cities of the ancient world and those of the medieval period. Its late Roman design became the model for medieval cities, from its massive walls constructed under Constantine and the Emperor Theodosius to the prominence of its churches. After discussing its design and founding, we'll look at the city as it existed in the 6th century under the dynamic Emperor Justinian, when the population reached 500,000 people. In addition to issues of size, longevity, and location, the design of the city distinguishes it as a deliberate imperial capital with similarities, I think, to capitals of modern times. Constantine was the first Christian emperor, and despite what you may have heard or read online, and despite the number of times I've said that this is not correct, everybody seems to believe that Constantine named Christianity Rome's official religion. He did not, all right? What he did do was legalize Christianity and gave it certain financial protections and support. That is, he passed a proclamation that legalized Christianity, made it acceptable for people to worship in public, and required all those people that had taken things from the Christians in previous years, that is, Christian property, Christian objects, things like the areas of churches, the material that you used in Mass, and they had to give it all back, all right? But it's not the official religion, not yet. Constantine's sincere Christian belief was probably not a factor in the decision to found a new capital, but it was a very large factor in the form of that new capital, particularly in the monuments that we see. The city of Constantinopolis, which literally means city of Constantine, is referred to as Constantinople in more recent times, before it became, as it is now, Istanbul. It was founded by Constantine in AD 330. This is 6 years after he defeated his last rival for power, and 5 years after he participated in the church council at Nicaea, that had settled long-standing debates within Christianity over the tenets of the faith. That council was also notable for the attendance of the emperor, placing him as part of the decision-making structure for Christianity. Constantine was responsible for the initial placement and layout of the city and for its monuments. Like Rome before it, this new capital was founded on a site with 7 hills, showing the importance of that symbolic continuity. And we will see that throughout, Constantine making decisions based on creating a continuity with what had come before. Constantine, however, died in 337 AD, before the city could be completed. So, although he founded it, Constantinople was, as we know it, really the product not just of his design, but of the later expansion under the Emperor Theodosius I. Theodosius was emperor for a very long period at that time, that is 379 to 395 AD, and it's Theodosius who constructed many of the buildings in the grand public spaces. He also made Christianity the official religion of the empire. So, credit for that goes to Theodosius. And he promoted the further move of people and government from the city of Rome to the new capital. In addition, he shifted official Roman policy against pagan temples. It was under Theodosius, for example, that the Serapeum, that great temple of the god Serapis at Alexandria, which we discussed in Lecture 16, was destroyed, and prominent pagan temples in Rome itself were closed. Theodosius, it can be argued, established the precedent for medieval kingship through his legal, military, and monumental actions. His image, seated under a canopy, we refer to it as a presence canopy because it serves to frame the presence of the ruler, but his image, seated under a canopy at the top center of relief panels, was the model for medieval kings, while Constantinople became the great bastion of Western civilization, the rift between the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches notwithstanding. It held up as that bastion of Western civilization for the next 1,000 years. Now, the site of Constantinople was selected based on a number of advantages. It was close enough to directly supervise the rich eastern provinces, particularly those provinces in Asia, that is today Turkey. It was close enough to intervene against invasions across the frontiers, particularly across the Danube River or through Asia. And it guarded the vital trade route that connected the Mediterranean and Black Seas. The Bosphorus, that is the narrow strait, and it is narrow, it's about 700 meters or about 2,275 feet at its narrowest point. This is the narrow strait that connects those two seas, the Mediterranean and Black Sea. Also makes it a natural east-west conduit because you can ferry across that. In a lot of ways, I think this is very similar to what Rome was like in Italy when it was founded in the 8th century BC. Rome and Italy became a major regional crossroads. And Constantinople does the same. It spans the major regional crossroads. It was also easily defensible, unlike many other major cities of the empire, because it was built on a triangular peninsula with very poor access from the sea, so no good natural harbors for people to sail up and attack the city directly. Also, one of Constantine's first acts was to erect a major set of walls that surrounded the entire city. Now, city walls are often viewed as signs of strength and security, when in fact they reflect just the opposite. Rome had walls that were built in about 380 BC and were obsolete after about 200 BC because of its powerful army. It only received its second set of walls in the AD 270s. These were indicators, very good indicators, of the insecurity of the times. And for good reason. Rome was repeatedly attacked until it was sacked in AD 410 and suffered its final fall in AD 476. Nevertheless, Constantinople's walls did provide security. They defended the city from the 4th into the 15th century with only 2 breaches, in 1204 AD and the final fall of the Christian city in 1453 AD. The walls are arguably responsible not just for the preservation of the city, but for the preservation of Christianity in Europe, holding off the Ottoman forces for so long that the Christians were able to rally and to finally check the Ottoman advance. In the process, these walls became one of the defining monuments of the city, arguably its most recognizable feature. Well, Constantine's walls no longer exist in any recognizable form, but the second set of walls, built under Theodosius II, from about 408 to 450 AD, are intact in large areas. They include a double wall that cut off the peninsula from the land beyond it. That is, this is that triangular-shaped peninsula. Two sides are at sea, one is on land, and so on that land side, you have this great double wall. This included a long wall about 5.8 kilometers in length, which made a formidable boundary, with an outer wall about 9 meters or 29 feet in height, and an inner wall about 12 meters or 39 feet in height, with as many as 96 towers throughout the circuit of the walls. And these are the towers that they would use for defense. They project out as bastions from the wall, and are slightly higher than the wall, allowing you to attack any invading force on three sides. So those are terribly important as part of the entire fortification system. Well, to make the fortifications even more formidable, a fortress was built across the Bosphorus, and a chain, perhaps 700 meters or 2,275 feet long, stretched between the city and that fort. And when we think of a chain, we need to think of a chain with great links in it that are perhaps 1.5 feet in length. Enormous chain. And that stretched across the Bosphorus to block ships from moving through that natural one good harbor, the Golden Horn. Well, today, of course, defensive walls are no longer defining aspects of major centers of power. Washington, D.C., for example, has no walls because it's protected by projected power. But we can find many similarities, I think, between Constantinople and Washington in the way both cities present the power and authority of the governments they were designed to house. Like Constantinople, Washington was built rather self-consciously as a capital city designed to refer back culturally and forward politically. For example, D.C. uses traditional Roman forms to strengthen the authority of its institutions within those buildings. The Supreme Court building is based on the Capitolium in Rome. The Lincoln Memorial makes visual reference to ancient temples, and in fact the inscription inside refers to it explicitly as a temple. And the Capitol building and the Jefferson Memorial feature domes based on the Pantheon of Hadrian in Rome. The subjects of the buildings reflect the United States' new government, with its defining legislative and judicial branches. The monuments reflect the heads of the executive branch, or at least those who we particularly honor. Altogether, these monuments assert the government's legitimacy and its authority. In a similar way, as the structure of a new capital, the buildings of Constantinople reflected the needs of the government and the beliefs of its founder, Constantine. For example, many pagan statues and monuments were brought from around the empire to decorate the city, illustrating Constantine's need to project cultural continuity with the pagan past. He doesn't want to just reject the culture and all of those things that made Rome great. And so he deliberately collects things from around the empire. We've mentioned one of these objects already before in a previous lecture, the great Chryselephantine statue of Athena Parthenos from the Parthenon in Athens was brought here to Constantinople. The best documented example of this cultural appropriation is found in the baths of Zeuxippus, adjacent to the Great Palace in Constantinople. Now, the baths were built about 100 years earlier, but under Constantine, they were lavishly decorated with a large group of over 80 statues. This sculptural assemblage was so impressive that a poet, Christodorus of Coptos is a small city in Egypt, so he came from far away, wrote a series of poems describing the sculptural group. So this is, as I say, the best documented sort of cultural appropriation we have. This sculptural group included a range of great Greek and Roman thinkers and authors, such as Homer and Hesiod, Aristotle, Demosthenes, Aeschines, and the Roman poet Virgil, among many others. Other displays of pagan gods and mythological heroes were established in the bath complex as well. Now, I should tell you, it's been argued that placing these figures in the baths was a means of demoting them, and therefore sort of symbolically desanctifying the pagan gods, for example. This pattern of bath decor, however, follows that found in many earlier public bath complexes with no intended denigration. So I don't think actually that argument holds here. I think it is designed to be a celebration of these qualities. Well, it seems certain that Constantine was taking great pagan works from around the empire and moving them here to decorate the capital in a way that demonstrated its cultural significance and its acceptance of the cultural legacy of pagan antiquity. The city also had a very large circular forum and a long, broad, colonnaded main street of the type seen at many earlier Eastern cities, such as Ephesus, Miletus, and Alexandria. This main street terminated at the major palace complex. Alongside the palace were built baths, a basilica, gardens, and an enormous hippodrome. So having that palace at the end of the avenue effectively marks it as the most significant of all of the public buildings. And this, of course, is a departure from earlier city designs where the forum in the Roman world would be the terminal space at the end of a great avenue where you would have the public buildings of the Republican government or of a democracy. Here, that palace is the government building. Constantinople, however, was a Christian capital in many significant ways. In addition to the massive palace and government infrastructure, Constantine founded great churches, Hagia Sophia, Holy Wisdom, and Hagia Irina, Holy Peace, which were in that ceremonial and governmental center of the city. We'll explore Hagia Sophia a little later. Well, in terms of just pure square footage as well as symbolic importance, the Hippodrome, adjacent to the palace, was the most important of the public buildings in Constantinople. Its importance is clear, as the city does not have an amphitheater as a designated space for gladiatorial combat like the Colosseum in Rome. All major spectacle entertainments occurred in the Hippodrome, and emperors personally oversaw the most important, using these occasions to appeal to the crowd of at least 80,000 people. So this space is critically important because it becomes a stage for the emperor to demonstrate the benefits of his rule to vast numbers of the people in the city. Now, the major event in the venue was chariot racing, and the emperors took the opportunity to start the races and to personally reward the winning charioteers. They would actually drop the flag at the beginning of the races and give the prizes to the charioteers afterwards, connecting them personally with these great athletes and victors. The long central spina that divided the two halves of the track and the racetrack itself were all lined with statues and monuments from across the empire. An obelisk was brought from Egypt, continuing a pattern of cultural appropriation begun by the first Roman Emperor Augustus at Rome as a way of demonstrating control over that ancient land of Egypt. Notably, I think, that tradition continued in the modern world, with obelisks also brought directly from Egypt, set up in London and Paris, while in D.C., an obelisk, the Washington Monument, dominates the National Mall. The monuments on the spina of the Hippodrome give a sense of the place of the Hippodrome in the city and its role in providing a connection between emperors and successful charioteers. In the 6th century A.D., 7 statues were erected on the spina of the Hippodrome in honor of one charioteer, Porphyrius, the greatest charioteer of his time, who raced for both of the most important of the 4 chariot teams, the Greens and the Blues. None of these statues have survived, unfortunately. However, the bases of two of them have survived, and they are notable for the impressive, large-scale, and repetitive monuments to this individual. These monuments celebrate a great athlete in a space shared with other monuments to the emperors, specifically marble reliefs of Theodosius with a very similar composition. So it's interesting to have these monuments that reflect great athlete and emperor together that are almost visually identical and in the same space. It really is designed to create a permanent marker of that connection between the great athletes and the emperors. Well, the reign of the Emperor Justinian is arguably the final phase of construction in the city in antiquity. Justinian, who was emperor from 527 to 565 AD, undertook a great building program, but was also responsible for the greatest loss of life in the city prior to its fall in 1453. This loss of life took place during the Nika riots of AD 532. Political demonstrations in the Hippodrome were common because you have all these people together and it was an opportunity for them to actually display their grievances to the government. But the two major chariot racing teams, the Blues and the Greens, usually took opposite sides in these, balancing each other in influence. The Greens were largely supported by the lower classes and the Blues by the upper classes, so they didn't often have common cause. At this occasion, in 532 AD, however, the factions that supported both of the major teams joined forces. What began as a demonstration in the Hippodrome calling for the release of some convicted murderers escalated into calls for the overthrow of the emperor and the replacement of all of his chief advisors. These demonstrations culminated in the coronation of a replacement emperor by the people in the Hippodrome, and riots that spread from the Hippodrome throughout the city. As a response to this, Justinian finally called in the army to suppress the riots. The army killed 30,000 people in the Hippodrome and an unknown number elsewhere in the city. The event gives a sense of the power of 80,000 people when they're unified with one objective, but also the limits of that power when faced against a desperate ruler willing to use troops against his own populace. While as evidenced by his enhancement of Constantinople's walls, Justinian also had to contend with threats from outside Constantinople. Justinian actually, throughout much of his reign, was engaged in a great war. And this great war was actually not waged in the area of Constantinople, but largely in the western provinces of the Roman Empire. Justinian had lost control over the western provinces, Africa and Italy in particular, and sent his great general Belisarius west to retake them all. Nevertheless, although the capital was not near that fighting, he seems to have taken this opportunity to beef up the fortifications of the capital. Another part of his massive building program, in addition to fortifying the walls, was a great cistern under the area of the Forum and the palace. This cistern held 100,000 tons or 2.8 million cubic feet of water. The roof of the cistern was supported by 336 marble columns arranged in 12 rows of 28 columns over an area of about 100,000 square feet. Most of the columns were taken from other buildings, showing the speed and priority of the cistern's construction. Fed by an aqueduct, its capacity ensured the safety of the city in case of siege. By far, however, the most innovative and important of Justinian's building efforts was the rebuilding of the previous Hagia Sophia. This church had been destroyed in the Nika riots. Between 532 and 537 AD, the church was redesigned and rebuilt under the guidance of two Greek scientists. One of these passed away fairly quickly after the church after the design started, but the second one lived and seems to have been mostly responsible for the redesign and for supervising the construction. This man, Isidore of Miletus, is actually pretty remarkable. He was a teacher of geometry and of physics in the universities in Constantinople. And I like to mention him here because he's from that city of Miletus, which had been a center of Greek science by this point for about 1,000 years. The great Greek scientific revolution actually had its founding in Miletus in the late 6th and early 5th centuries BC. Well, Hagia Sophia was severely damaged by earthquakes in the 550s AD and rebuilt in its current form in that time, in time to be rededicated in 562 AD. The dome of Hagia Sophia is considered the greatest work of Byzantine architecture and a very influential work of architecture. In fact, other domed buildings, such as the Duomo in Florence, are inspired by Hagia Sophia. It uses a rib dome design. It's about 107 feet or 33 meters in diameter. By comparison, the Pantheon in Rome is just over 140 feet or 43 meters in diameter. And the Pantheon was the largest concrete dome built from its time up to the 20th century. Hagia Sophia, however, is much taller and a larger building, consisting not just of that central dome, but a series of surrounding half domes, each of which is also set with half domes below it. So the entire structure rises about 182 feet, or about 56 meters, from the floor to the great central full dome. It's an enormous structure, much larger than any previous Roman temple in interior space. Well, despite the revolutionary religious identity of the new Roman capital, it's worth reminding ourselves that the people of 4th to 6th century Constantinople had far more in common with the ancient pagan Greeks and Romans than they did with people of medieval or modern times. Although gladiatorial combat was outlawed, animal hunts were the second most popular spectacle in the hippodrome after chariot racing. And big cats, particularly those from lands that threatened to invade the Roman Empire, such as the Persian and Parthian empires, were a particular favorite for spectacular death. The people of Constantinople lived in a city that became the model of the medieval city, as its rulers became the models for medieval monarchs. The city itself was eventually taken in AD 1453, marking the final end of the Roman Empire, but not the end of the city. As Istanbul, it still continues today, demonstrating the longevity of a city that was well-founded, designed, and built. The walls, cistern, and Hagia Sophia are all still there to see as well. The latter two, the cistern and Hagia Sophia, were used virtually intact into the 20th century. That notion of city survival and what it takes will be discussed in the next and final lecture of this series.